Hello, everyone, and welcome to this WFA session on diversity in media. It's great to see so many of you joining us today, so thank you for that. My name is Camelia Christake. I'm WFA's Diversity and Inclusion Lead, and I'm delighted to be welcomed to welcome today. Our brilliant lineup of experts who have joined us here today. You will be hearing from them about the opportunities, as well as about some of the watch-outs from a diversity perspective for brands to consider within their media choices. For those of you not familiar with the WFA, we are a global network bringing together some of the biggest brands in the world and some of the biggest advertiser markets. We have a global footprint in 60 markets around the world. And our agenda as a not-for-profit is informed by the priorities of our members. And of course, diversity and inclusion continues to be a top priority for our CMOs, and therefore a top agenda item for the WFA as well. For that reason, and it's because the right thing to do, we've been working with our members on a number of initiatives in this space. More recently, on a new guide just released on diversity and inclusion in media planning and buying, which we're here to discuss. I'm delighted to be welcoming now our webinar hosts and guide leads, who will be walking us through the thinking behind the new guide and also what some of the opportunities that I've mentioned are. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Camelia. My name's Jerry Daykin. I'm a WFA diversity ambassador and really proud to have fed into this guide and helped shape this. I think we often talk about the importance of, or increasingly talk about the importance of diversity and inclusion in our teams, in our creative. But as someone who works in media in my day job, I think it's really fantastic to have a chance to talk about the importance of D&I in our media thinking as well. And I know personally, as a gay man who grew up in a quite a conservative house, that media was a really important window for me on the world. And sometimes it was the advertising and the content marketers were produced, and often it was the TV shows or the wider content around that they were funding. That helped me understand, there were people who looked and thought and acted like me out there. And I think we have a real responsibility now as marketers to continue ensuring we fund good stuff. We don't fund the bad stuff. And I'm thrilled to be joined by Isabel, the Global Media Director at Diageo, who's hugely input into this guide as well. And Isabel, why is this such an important topic to you?
I think myself and Jerry have had many conversations on this topic over the years, the months, and the recent weeks, and primarily because imagine a mainstream media landscape where you don't see yourself represented, or perhaps worse, you just see a really stereotypical depiction of yourself, whether that be in TV programs, in news articles, or in advertising. Well, sadly, many people watching this webinar today, they don't have to imagine this. It's what they experience day to day. And in my role as Global Media Director, I'm acutely aware that the choices I make, the choices that we make as Diageo, can have a positive or a negative impact on inclusion and diversity in the media landscape. And that's because the media owner content that's out there is often funded by the advertising that supports it. And that means that advertisers' money can have a considerable impact on what does or doesn't get funded. And many of the more progressive TV shows in recent years have only been made possible by the support of advertisers. And it's great as well that we have industry initiatives like the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, who are also considering the impact of brand safety on diversity and inclusion. And that's why GARM, the Global Alliance for Responsible Media's collaboration with this guide has been so important. And we'll be touching on this more today, but back to you, Jerry.
Brilliant. So myself, Izzy and Rob are going to talk you through top line some of this guide as we think about diversity representation in media planning. And then we've got a brilliant panel with three different perspectives from the industry about how an agency, a client and a media owner really sort of thinking about this. But the quick background to this work, as Camelia hinted at, the WFA has been doing quite a lot in this space. We think it's a really important topic. The research that the WFA does of its members says it's a real priority for CMOs right down through the business. And so about 2 years ago now, we formed this WFA diversity task force, representatives from dozens of companies, mainly WFA members, but also some honorary agencies and other partners. We really wanted to make sure it was an inclusive conversation. Myself and Belinda Smith have been the two diversity ambassadors helping drive it, with Belinda driving a lot of the thinking about what great internal inclusion can look like, and me and my sort of a breakout group of the task force trying to think about what great external marketing and representation looks like. And last year we launched this 12-stage guide. A lot of the conversations we had, the research we did, showed that marketers were increasingly trying to be more inclusive in their marketing. They were trying to build in diversity representation. It is, after all, our jobs to really understand and respond to our consumers. But right through the marketing process, there were many steps, at which case things could get lost if you didn't have enough time, if you didn't give it enough conscious thought, whether that's in writing the brief, whether it's the teams who are working on it, whether it's, you know, what gets cut in post-production, whether it's, you know, how you launch it and get it out there. And so you can find this wider guide. It talks through these sort of the 12 stages, but we're really going to dive in on media, which we think, as we both hinted, is a really important topic. And to try and navigate that, we've sort of thought 4 really clear themes. Now, some of you on this call may have been thinking about diversity and inclusion within media for quite some time. You might be quite advanced in some of this. Some of you, this might be one of the first times you actually start to think, gosh, there's something that we need to be doing here. But we've come up with these 4 stages. And we do hope that they all kind of help shape the conversation, drive it forwards. And so we will talk through them all today, but it's basically right from the start of that process. So media has its own process that sits alongside that wider marketing process, and ensuring right at the beginning that, you know, audiences are diverse and inclusive at that planning stage. It's about supporting diverse voices, so making deliberate media decisions and building partnerships that, you know, support and ensure that those media titles, whether dedicated diverse titles or just mainstream media doing really positive coverage of those audiences, continue to thrive. It's about balancing brand safety, a really key bit that Rob will unpack from a GARM perspective around this idea of consciously managing the brand suitability, but also avoiding exclusion, not having so many words on your blocking list that, you know, nothing good can get through either. And of course, because we're marketers and ultimately our job is to drive sales and make stuff happen, it's about measuring success. So we're going to talk you through these 4 areas one by one, and give you a kind of a case study for what someone is doing in that space. And I'll pass back over to Isabel to get us started.
Yeah, so the first topic, inclusive audience planning, ensuring audiences are diverse and inclusive at the planning stage. And when it comes to media planning, and I see many media planners that I know on the line today, I think we all know that a diverse and nuanced understanding of an audience is critical, especially where targeting decisions could specifically exclude different groups, or perhaps lead to those generalizations or stereotypes that I mentioned earlier, rather than capture real representative perspectives. And this is the moment when it's key that we, as the people who are looking at these audiences, ask ourselves some very simple but piercing questions. And you'll find these outlined in the guide, but I'll reference some of these now. So, does your brief make it clear that representation is key? Who is your audience? But often, actually, the piece that we don't put in briefs that I think is really interesting for us to include is who is actually excluded. So think about who is included in your audience, but who is excluded, and is it right that they are excluded? Have you exhibited any bias in your exclusion of that audience? Is the target audience definition a stereotype or a generalization? How have you visualized that audience as you were starting to bring them to life? And if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, I want to bring this to life on an example of what we did at Diageo, and this was with Guinness. It's a brand that is synonymous with sport and the rugby occasion, which and Guinness as a beer and sport and rugby as an occasion can be very male, and we became very, very aware of this. And a big challenge for sport, a big challenge in particular for female sport, is media visibility. globally, just 6% of sports coverage is dedicated to female athletes and teams. And our advertising media planning approach could perpetuate this issue if we continue to focus on the male audience. So we at Diageo, with the Guinness brand, we really wanted to tackle this head on. And hopefully many of you on the line today will have seen some of the work, in particular through our Six Nations, because through our Never Settle campaign, which is connected in particular with rugby and the Six Nations, we championed inclusivity by making the women's Six Nations more visible in media, celebrating its stars across paid, earned and owned media. And so this wasn't just about advertising. We worked with large-scale media partners such as Twitter to underline the importance of creating more visibility for these players and resulting in the players' accounts being verified. We partnered with Wikipedia to write and verify the biographies of each player on Wikipedia, because that's one of the main sources of information for media when reporting on the women's game. And finally, we pitched out multiple interviews to highlight this activity to sports and lifestyle media. And so this campaign for us proved that we should never settle and accept that male sports coverage is all people want to see. And advertisers, particularly those that are connected to particular areas, in this case for us, Guinness and sport, really can play a key role in breaking this cycle through choiceful media planning and execution.
Brilliant. So the next theme that we had was really actively supporting diverse voices. And this is when you actually, in this modern day world of media planning, programmatic buying, etc., our media choices are sometimes not as deliberate as they used to be. We're not always calling up a media owner and choosing to buy from them. But I think there's a real need and a real opportunity to do exactly that, whether it's through how you do your programmatic buying, it's whether you do sort of specific partnerships, but really making sure that we are deliberately supporting diverse voices. As I hinted at in the introduction, that can mean working with very mainstream media partners, but really encouraging and sponsoring and supporting editorial or content that, you know, breaks down barriers. You know, here in the UK, Channel 4 as a TV partner is really well recognized for doing some really groundbreaking content, all of which is paid for by advertisers. There also is a really wonderful world of diverse publications or even individual influencers out there, which are really great ways at not only getting to diverse audiences, but really accelerating your knowledge and understanding of those audiences as well. There are often really great opportunities to partner with them, to learn from them, to shape content together, to use their insights, and often to shape stuff with them that's really true, really authentic, and actually works to a much broader audience as well. I've seen consistently a lot of businesses nowadays developing supplier diversity programs, so procurement teams starting to look really at what you're buying from, who you're buying from, how you're making sure that the partners you work with and the partners they work with are more diverse. And media is a really fantastic opportunity to be part of that, to make sure that we are, you know, working with businesses that are diversity owned or operated, that talk and support that different communities. And yeah, I'm a massive fan of all media partnerships. I think it's one of the most interesting parts of the media world. And I really think that, you know, in the D&I space, then working with specific networks or publishers who can help you navigate that can be a real helping hand. And so the case that I wanted to talk through is something that my former colleagues at GSK have been working on, something I was really proud to have been a part of, which was now a 2-year-long and still going collaboration with Gay Times. And so the team across a couple of brands, Sensodyne, but also the Voltarol brand, decided they wanted to really start thinking about how to better talk to and represent the LGBT community. They didn't want to do so just in a kind of tacked on sort of Pride Month way. They wanted to really build something that was ongoing and authentic. And they worked with Gay Times as a media owner who both had an audience, both had a media platform that we could use, but also could really help us in understanding that audience, doing research with them, finding insights, casting for some of our ads. And we've deliberately been exploring with them different elements of representation. Some of the work, some of this Sensodyne work you can see here, it's quite casual representation. We work with them people who they knew, quite diverse, inclusive casting, but ultimately the ad was still a story about teeth sensitivity and eating hot or cold drinks. We've also done with the Voltarol brand, we did some more deliberate and purposeful storytelling in which we partnered with a charity, supported LGBT sports clubs during the pandemic to try and help them retrain, reshape, rethink about how to run them, and really told the stories of some of those sports people. So the brand almost took a back seat to kind of just amplifying those voices. Both have been really effective for us. Both have worked really well, both to that specific LGBT audience, but also when we've expanded on it programmatically and even run it on platforms like Facebook much broadly. And I think for us, it's been a real way to fast track our knowledge and understanding. And by continuing that ongoing partnership, it means we're not just a sort of flash in the pan, let's turn up and stick a rainbow on something. It's really like how we're funding LGBT media, we're funding charity, but we're talking to these consumers, and it's been really well received. So for us, that's a great example of the power of partnership to bring things together. And I'll throw over to Rob now to talk a little bit about the brand safety side of things.
Thank you, Jerry. It's so good to see everybody. So we know that brand safety is a primary area where a lot of brands look at this in terms of how to manage risk. And we've seen sort of the industry start to confront the area of harmful content online. Now, naturally, what we see in a sort of open and live internet where it's moving at the pace of culture is that we've seen probably a little bit of over conservatism in the way that brands approach brand safety and suitability relative to DE&I. And really what we wanted to do was start to face into this tension together in this guide. So what we've been looking to do is make sure that, yes, brands and agencies and platforms and publishers should be helping manage reputation, but at the same time, and safety, but at the same time addressing the idea of suitability and making sure that brands can be as inclusive as they are. We know that a lot of brands have these in place, but what we were able to do was look across a whole host of practices and be able to identify some of the areas that have been quite good. And I think that one of the things that we've been inspired by is some of the foundational research by Vice around sort of the 25 sort of common labels that could allow a brand to be slightly more conservative than the audience or the content that we want to embrace. Likewise, we found research from Czech that found that like sort of 73% of neutral labels for something as innocuous as say LGBTQ plus resulted in an overblocking of content. And similarly to where we've seen ourselves in the industry in terms of current events, something like COVID-19 was something that was a new and newsworthy environment and topic. We found that the overreaction and sort of conservative approach to it led to a defunding of journalism. So in a hit on sort of publishers in a momentary sort of a lapse in time, and those tend to hurt. So some of the questions that we should be asking ourselves as leaders, whether we're on the marketing side or on the agency side, of when was the last time that a brand safety setting was actually reviewed? Is it annual? Is it quarterly? Is it semi-annually? And if it's honestly beyond that sort of annual level, then you should probably be looking there. Secondly, is who actually created that list? Was it as diverse a group as the audience and the publishers that you're trying to embrace? And pressure testing it and sort of saying, could that block list actually result into exclusion when you're trying to drive inclusion? And then finally, should you be supplementing your brand safety approach with focused inclusion lists, as well as direct publisher relationships as we'd seen before? The next slide, please. And what we have here is a case where we've seen an agency group like Group M work with a client like Bayer to make sure that absolutely that these keyword lists, which a lot of us rely on, whether we're going on to a YouTube, or we're looking at sort of programmatic or open web or publisher relationships, this is almost like the Rosetta Stone. So after you've done your brand safety and suitability selection in terms of categories and risk levels, this is like that next level down. And really what, in our conversations with Bayer and Group N, what we were able to see is that they brought together that diverse team. They looked at sort of what was on that current block list and making sure that there was actually a do not block list. And this was actually quite interesting because the learning here is as sort of clear and as up to date as you think your block list is, it's also important to have a do not block list, because the two of them in concert with each other make sure that your brand hits the right messaging. So we've seen here things like Asian, Jew, Muslim, really sort of like big sort of broad categories. We want to make sure that those are actually on a sort of do not block list, because what you want to do is make sure that that block list actually reads almost like as precise as a Google search term. So something like COVID, you'd want to make sure that you're getting away from sort of maybe the touchier areas, whether it happens to be around sort of backups in morgues and stuff. So this is, again, another really great sort of example of how we've seen a brand and agencies confront sort of some of the fine-tuned settings on brand safety and suitability and make sure that they're inclusive and not exclusive.
One of those calls where sometimes you forget you're presenting because you're enjoying listening to the other presenters so much. Well, this is definitely one of them, but it's me again talking about measuring success. So if you want to make something a business imperative, I think we all recognize that it's vital to be able to measure it. And diverse media titles and audiences, they tend to be smaller and harder to track, and sometimes may even be totally excluded from industry monitoring tools that we use. And so demonstrating the true value these choices bring is absolutely key to continuing to invest in them. So first and foremost, it's worth investing in dedicated research. That might be a brand study or a sales study to capture the impact that the media is having on your bottom line. And again, I'll give you a Diageo example of this on the next slide. So at Diageo, we set out on a journey to intentionally buy more media that is representative of the multicultural audiences that are so important to the fabric of the US. And we put in place a learning agenda. So we used our econometric models to do that, to understand the true business impact of buying media differently, and to enable us to learn and grow. And I think that's the operative term there, learn and grow, because when we first looked at the results, we saw incredibly low return on investment. And disappointing the results were for everyone. And we could really easily concluded that this approach just doesn't pay out, and therefore stopped our efforts in this space. But a bit like other media channels, when you first go on them, you sometimes have to work hard to make it work hard for your business. And we fundamentally believe that doing the right thing in terms of supporting diverse and inclusion so diversity and inclusion in media could also mean doing the right thing for business. We just needed to figure out how. And over time, with close monitoring, we were able to significantly improve results. And now this media is some of our best performing media that we run. So the story here from our perspective, and one that we have scaled to many of our markets, is one of optimization, of learning, and fundamentally believing that doing the right thing can also mean the right thing for business.
Brilliant. So this kind of final slide to wrap things up is really a cheat sheet with some of the questions we've hinted at along the way. So if you want to screenshot it, tweet it, print it out, it's in the guide itself, of course. But here are some of the real questions we think you can ask along these 4 stages that we've talked about. Everything from, who is your audience? What are you excluding when you define them? How are you deliberately partnering with and supporting and working with those minorities? How are you getting that balance of brand safety? Absolutely. The work of GARM is doing fantastic stuff to ensure brand safety and to sort of defund hate speech. We just need to make sure we don't defund any of the good stuff as well. And I think Isabel and Diageo journey they've been on, I think lots of us on this journey want to do this not just because it's a good and nice thing, but because it's a really good thing for business, that tapping into these audiences and serving these audiences can work. And really great to see increasing examples of the fact that you can measure it and show that it does. And why wouldn't it? After all, it's media, it's relevant media, it's getting in front of an audience, it's how advertising works. So hopefully that's given you some overall context. And now Isabel's going to talk us through our panelists. And just a reminder, there is a Q&A functionality if you do want to ask some questions for the end of that.
Yeah, so any questions that you ask, Jerry will be posing into the room as the audience. So please do make him work hard today and send your questions in, and we'll sure to make sure that we answer a good few of them as the panel proceeds. And what a wonderful panel we have today, and great to see representation from advertiser, agency and media platform, as each has such an important role to play individually as a collective on this topic. So first of all, Nadalie, Chief Strategy Officer at M6, welcome. Really looking forward to hearing your views from an agency perspective. Chris, who is CEO and founder of Brand Advance Group and recently moved to New York. Thank you so much for joining us. I should imagine there's moving chaos around you, but I am delighted that you managed to find time to join us today. And Efrain, Global Director of Diversity and Inclusion in Marketing at Reckitt. Really excited to hear your perspective from an advertiser's perspective, especially given your contributions to the guide. So let me set up the panel, and then I will be asking the first question to Efrain. So I think everyone will have heard from the course of this webinar, and if you've read the guide, that the theme that keeps coming up is that just as important as the messages that we put out is where they show up. And as marketers, a lot of that is in media. Media is where we build our brands. Media is how we nudge people to buy. Media is how we answer people's search queries. And everyone has a different view on things, but mine is that it is not good enough if this media landscape is not a true reflection of today's society. And that's thinking about diversity in the broadest sense. So, Efrain, I would love to hear your perspective on this. What does the intersection of DEI and media look like to you, and why is it important?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and of course for having me here. I think it's pretty simple in my eyes, and maybe it's a little too simple, but I think it's fundamentally, you first need to understand what your brand stands for. Like, what is your brand about? And specifically, who are the people and the communities that your brand's products, services can disproportionately benefit? And then asking yourselves, do we invest in a way that reflects those things? That's, to me, the intersection of really understanding what your brand can authentically offer specific communities and making sure that your investments in media are matching that, so you can show up in the right places, you can show up to the right people and in the right ways.
And tell me a little bit about your own journey at Reckitt, because I can imagine that people listening to the webinar today are going to be at various stages of the journey of embedding diversity and inclusion into their own media journeys.
Yeah, I think for us, it's been a really interesting journey. We're very much in the early stages, but I think a lot of what Rob was expressing in, brand safety has been traditionally treated as a bit of a blunt instrument to kind of offer protection or confidence to marketeers in terms of where they're investing. And I think in some of that, we saw, even with Rob's slides, that a lot of bias and a lot of exclusion is making its way into those places and spaces. And brand safety isn't necessarily something that everyone's super excited to work on. So you don't necessarily see it being revisited often. So now you've got long periods where specific terms are being inadvertently, maybe at this point, excluded, which then harms our ability to support the voices that we say we care about. So specifically our Durex business, here's a brand where, a lot of people are left behind when it comes to sexual wellness and sexual health literacy. And when we think about in the UK, only 14% of LGBTQ plus individuals think current sex ed is relevant to their experiences, and only 6% feel that that sex ed gives them confidence in their sexuality. And that confidence translates to sexual health and wellness. If you're more confident, you're going to ask that your partner put on that condom. You're going to be more in control. And so for us, when we peeked under the hood of our brand safety settings, we saw a lot of the words that were on the do not block list in our block list. And so handling such a specific category like sexual wellness and knowing that the GARM framework is a bit of a blunt tool, we partnered with Double Verify, Reckitt's global brand safety partners, and a certified brand safety officer at Ubiquity to really look at the landscape of our global Durex brand safety approach and really bring a global constituent together to build those inclusive lists around what do we want to block, what do we definitely do not want to block, and really instituting that. And that enabled the Durex UK team to launch the largest ever LGBTQ plus sex survey they've ever done to invite the LGBT voices to develop the next era of sex ed, to make sure that they're being invited to this. And had we not taken a look at brand safety, we never would have been able to bring those voices into our work, because we never would have been able to reach them, to invite them into the survey and build a sex ed model that meets their needs and their unique lived experiences.
Gosh, that's such an inspirational example. That it's nothing to do with execution. It's to do with unlocking opportunity. It's just incredible. I'm going to be bringing that back to my work this afternoon. As we unlock opportunity, we make brand safety really, really interesting for everyone.
Exactly.
Nadalie, I'd love to bring you into the conversation, because the kind of things that Efrain is talking about it's not things that advertisers do by themselves. You have to do it with partners, and in particular agency partners are core to this. We've talked earlier, in fact I talked about it, the importance of the briefing process and avoiding generalizations or depicting audiences in a stereotypical way. How else can agencies collaborate with their clients? Sorry.
I think there's a lot of different ways, but actually they were pretty much highlighted throughout the presentation. We talked a lot about brand safety, obviously, and inventory. And I think there's ways that you can look at your current strategies from an agency perspective and bring those forward to your clients. When you're thinking about the brand and trying to build that connectivity within the brief, take a look and see if the data is telling you something and building upon that. Because as you guys have already mentioned, so many people are in different parts of their journey, and it's okay to take small steps, because those small steps can really unlock big value. And if we're starting from that perspective of like, okay, we typically only run with these top 200 publishers, which I would say most brands do, understanding why is that? Are there other places or content that's resonating with people that you just are not touching on today because you're actively avoiding it? So there's ways to really think through existing historical media and kind of turning it on its head and bringing it back to your clients and allowing that to be incorporated into the brief a bit more.
What kind of tips do you give your clients to get it right?
I think giving yourself the space to think about something and really trying to dig into it. And to your point, it might not work on the first try, and that's okay, because it requires refinement, it requires strategy, and that's just born from evolution, right? So if you think about this more in the context of, I need to figure out and test what works for my brand and how I can show up authentically, that's a really good starting point and mindset to be in at the start, so that you don't have to go back to your teams and they can turn around and say, well, it doesn't work, right? You need to know that it requires time to get to that place where you're showing not only the value back to the community, but also to the business. And I would say, like, having that mindset is really powerful, because it gives you the wherewithal, because the answer is probably going to be, it's not working. No, this isn't right. And you need to be able to kind of take that information back and adjust and represent it. So it's a long journey.
And I think that in this area can be so tricky because people do worry about getting it wrong, you know, particularly, for example, brand safety settings. Getting that wrong could have big consequences, or having a stereotypical depiction in a brief. You just wouldn't want that. So how do you give people that confidence in your own team?
Yeah, I think we have to take a moment and read through it and put your people lens on, right? I think we think too much as marketers, and we want the most expansive definition, or we want the most specific definition. If you look at something, I think for most people, there is an internal radar where you feel like this doesn't sound right. This feels funny, right? I think you can bring some of that forward and say, hey, this took a moment for me when I was reading it and didn't seem genuine. It's felt a little bit stereotypical or too generalist. And I want us to rethink what this means. And of course, you can't do that if everyone in the room has the same perspective. So you already need to be incorporating, kind of thinking back more of the people side of this in terms of the diversity, is having people at the table who can speak from different perspectives and different mindsets to challenge that. Because at the end of the day, if everyone who has the same experience is looking at something, they might not feel that that's not correct, right? So really making sure that you're opening the door to allow those types of conversation and creating a forum where people feel okay to say, hey, this doesn't seem right.
Yeah, it's such a good tip. And I think one to give us all confidence in this work, and the fact that we won't always get it right, and in particular first time. Chris, I'm going to go to you with the same question with a slightly different spin on it, because your business is a media network and you help brands reach diverse demographics at scale through the relationships that you have with diverse digital publishers. But in doing this as well, you importantly support small publishers that I mentioned, you know, that often can't be measured because they're not as part of industry measurement reports. And so they might not have even got on plans in the first place had it not been for your network. So you're really close to this area. Like, what's your take on how advertisers are getting it right, and also how they're getting it wrong?
I think I want to change the little mindset of the conversation a bit. It's not the worry of getting it wrong. It's the worry of, I would challenge everybody to say it's the worry of not doing it, to miss out on them big demographics, you know, like the Latinx and African American in the US, or like the Indian and Pakistani population in the UK, that are fast growing populations. So I just want to change the mindset to, you know, the worry of not reaching them, not the worry about doing it wrong, reaching them, if you know what I mean. And I think also you sort of have to look at the media measurement, and mainstream media has had a long time to get itself ready for measurement. So it's had a lot of commercial revenue come in, and therefore it's being able to bring itself up to a standard in, you know, that they have been at the table to dictate what that standard is, how we're going to be measured, what are the tools that we're going to be part of to be measured. Diversity media wasn't there, wasn't invited to the table. Actually, if we're all honest with each other, we only started talking about it in 2018, 2019, you know, so we can't sort of, I think the industry needs to recognize that and to acknowledge it, and then to say, okay, you know, we don't want you to start with one hand behind your back, because we're going to tell you to be measured at the same standards as everyone else, but we're going to tell you it after not giving you 30 years to catch up and to get used to it and to have commercial revenue to help you achieve that. So I think we've got to give it its time to catch up, but the measurements are still there. You know, you still measure with click through and view through, and actually you're talking to audiences that have not had as many ads put in front of them, and the results, you know, you said yourself, the results in the US, in the end, you started to see really great results. We see great results all the time. That is because we're sticking ads in front of audiences that have never seen that ad before, because that brand has never been in that environment. It's never advertised to that audience in, you know, culturally relevant media. So people are going to it and saying, okay, what have you got to say, ad? You know, whereas in mainstream media, they've had sort of 30 years of seeing that ad. So they might be a little bit I don't know what the word is, but not oblivious, but they stop reacting to the ads because they've seen it so much over so many years. So I think that there are some great gains to be had by getting into media where there ain't so many of you trying to get that consumer. And again, I'd say we've got to be honest with ourselves. Advertising is only done correctly as an agency for their brand, or as a brand to their consumers, if you are sticking your ad in front of as many people as possible that would possibly buy that product or service. That is advertising. You know, there's not culture, culture marketing and marketing. Culture marketing is marketing done correctly. Anything else is nearly marketing. You know, if the ad isn't in front of me as much as it's in front of you, Izzy, then it's not marketing done correctly, and we're catching up with ourselves. And I think we've got to be honest with that. We're not trying to add something on that's good to have. We're just doing it proper now, where we've realized that we might have missed big audiences. We might have missed whole communities, whether it's through brand safety, whether it's through the media we use, whether it's just by the creative and them seeing themselves depicted in your creative. We're just doing marketing correct. We're not adding something special to marketing. We're just adding everybody that could possibly buy our product or service. And that is the definition of marketing, really, isn't it? So I think the mindset is, we've got to get ourselves into this new mindset now. It is, you know, whether it's Black people, whether it's LGBT, whether it's disability, speaking to all them is just marketing. And we need to make sure we have the tools, the brand safety, the planning tools, the insights, and the media to do all that, and to get more consumers, because that's what we're being asked to do. That's our job.
It's not another thing to do. It's part of how we do things.
Yeah, it's the thing being done better, you know, rather than another thing to add on to it. We're just doing marketing a little bit better than we were yesterday, and we're going to try and be better tomorrow.
And Chris, when advertisers first come to you, what tips do you get them to start on that journey?
The first thing we do is sort of say, okay, don't look at this as we're going to do some diversity marketing or some culture marketing. We really do harp in on the, you know, we're just going to do marketing. It's marketing. But now we're going to look at, are there pockets of consumers that you have not reached that now we're going to go for? So we get them to look at first define what a consumer is to them. And then how does that translate into each of the different demographics in whatever territory we're talking about, you know? So who buys your product, and what does that consumer persona look like in the Indian community, in the LGBT community, in you know, the over 50 community? What is that consumer, and what are they doing? Where are they? What media are they consuming? What's their interests? Basically what marketing is. You know, we do this already. We just sort of do it for mainstream. And what we just sort of say, replicate that. Don't look at it as something special. Look at it as just this. We're just going to look in a different consumer pot and try and find our consumers in there. We're gonna look at a different community, and we're going to try and find what makes them tick. And that sweet spot where we can find that makes a lot of communities tick, or, you know, that's the perfect place to advertise to, because then you've got lots of different communities that have something in common. And there is always something in common. And then I think as well, and you have done this a lot at Diageo, making it part of the whole procurement chain. Incentivize, you know, one great thing that I'm saying this as if I'm like blowing smoke up to you, but like, it's true. Incentivizing the team, incentivizing the agencies to we will give you more money if you give us a more diverse plan, if you give us a real good response to this RFP, to this brief, then we're really on board. That's what's going to that has already changed the game. You've done it, you know, Unilever doing it, Google and Meta, and all these brands now saying the more diverse the campaign response you give us, and the more diverse your team is that's putting this together, the more money we're going to give you, because we feel like you're going to give us consumers we didn't have yesterday.
It's so good from an advertiser's perspective. It's so good to hear when you hear the knock-on effect of that down the supply chain. So that's really good to hear, Chris. This isn't an internal program for internal program's sake, but it's really about, you know, supporting the people that you want to support. I'm gonna ask a question to everyone next, and it's actually you're mostly doing me a favor, because it's a question that I wrestle with on an ongoing basis, and I want to hear your perspectives on it. So I mentioned earlier in my setup that there are going to be many people on the call today that don't see themselves represented in media, or perhaps even worse, see stereotypical versions of themselves, and that's their day-to-day experience. I would love to, I'll post this to Chris first, and then please feel free to chip in others. Like, what do you think it's going to take to make mainstream media diverse and inclusive, and what do you see as your role in making this happen?
Okay, I'll keep it short and sweet so other people can talk, but it's already changing because money is being earmarked for these communities. So Unilever coming out and saying this year, 2022, we are going to spend 2 billion just on minority owned and operated media. You watch how many mainstream publications have an offshoot of a Black or LGBT version of that publication, headed by someone that they can say is from that minority group. It's going to happen a lot. And you've got Group M have done the same, and Publicis, etc. So I think the commercial aspect is really going to push it along. Obviously, I'm 39, I'm 40 in a few weeks, and it's taken too long. You know, my kids are teenagers now, and they're coming into a world where it's not quite there yet, and we should have sorted it out for them. But we're moving faster than we've ever moved, and I ain't going to shut up until they get there fast.
Efrain, what's your perspective on it? What's it going to take, and what do you see as your role?
Yeah, I think my role is really to show the business the connection to diverse media investment and their goals. You know, it's very much a mentality of showing back that in order we can do well as a business and do good. They are not mutually exclusive activities and outcomes. And so I think my role is to really advocate for the ways in which our brands can make a positive impact, not only to the bottom line, the business, but also to the communities that they can benefit and disproportionately benefit specifically. So I think similar to Chris, it's about, we can't stop talking about this. We're not where we need to be. We all can acknowledge that. That's why we're all here together, is to learn how we can push this forward. And so, you know, my role is going to be making that connection and also not shutting up. So I'm with Chris.
We're going to have a lot of noise on this call. Nadalie, to you.
I think there's a universal theme here. It's just keep saying it, right? Just keep saying that we haven't made it. I think, kind of going off of what Chris said, the money talks, but if you aren't working on a brand who has made this public commitment, from an agency perspective, you are still the person that's engaging with these media publications on a daily cadence. So you can have conversations with them and say, this is what our brands ultimately want to get towards. So you can start forcing the conversation to say, hey, you're not making it on a plan because you don't have the opportunities that we're looking for in the future. And that also really helps, because then it sets like content schedules and editorials. It at least greases the wheels a bit more if you're not working on a brand that has already decided to make this very, very public commitment. And pushing the envelope there is always critical. And I think my role in this is just making sure that it's not just my perspective that I'm bringing to the table. So I like to try and bring around everyone who I know has a very powerful voice and maybe hasn't had an opportunity to use it, and bringing them forward, because more people talking about it is just going to make the progress happen more quickly. And so just that's my sort of 2 cents on where I sit in the ecosystem of things. Again, it's okay that we are taking steps forward, and maybe they're not always crushing it, but at the end of the day, we're taking a step. So I think that's definitely, hopefully we can make more progress in the upcoming years.
And, you know, so a big message to everyone on the call today is that everyone has a voice. Let's use that voice. and that could be a very, very powerful force for change. On the subject of the audience, Jerry, voice of the audience, do you have any questions for the panel?
We do have a couple that we can throw out. So I'll throw a good one out from Filippo to start with, saying it's great when you see these kind of fully connected D&I campaigns with the creative and the media and everything. Does D&I media still work for sort of non-D&I specific campaigns, just with your main campaign? Efrain, you're nodding passionately, so maybe you could start with
yes. I think the short answer is absolutely. The example I shared with you is simply an example you can use on any business, whether you have a D&I effort coming or just business as usual. You know, literally just ask, what does my blacklist look like? And does that match the brand values? That's a great first place to start. And that is something you can do on everything that you activate against. So no, it does not have to be an exercise just for DE&I initiatives. I think the theme you're probably catching from the group is it should maybe be less of an initiative and more of just the normal.
I'd even jump in and just add on to what Efrain said. It's why, when you market to me, is it called a D&I marketing? But if you market to the white version of me, it's just called marketing. You know, like why? Look, we got to, that mentality, we've got to take it away. It's got to stop. We got marketing to me is just marketing done well, you know, and if it can market to me and to you, Jerry, and to you, Izzy, then it's marketing done really well, because you've just got lots of different people with different sort of mindsets. And you've made us all want to do the very thing that marketing's meant to do, and that is to buy or to purchase or some kind of intent. So yeah, I think we just let's stop calling it D&I marketing and let's just call it marketing. And then I think that is a big step. That will get you on the right step, because then you're just buying media. You're not buying black media. You're just buying media. You're just buying consumers. You're pushing your brand. So yeah, it's my 10 pence worth.
Because everyone loves a pylon, I just want to connect that back to creative, because I think what you just said for media is also equally true for creative. The number of times I've seen creative designated for just DE&I just doesn't make sense. We know that the world is changing in the way that it looks, and why are we just not featuring the reflection of our culture? That to me is a disconnect. And I think when brands say to me, how do I insert myself in culture? How do I become culturally relevant? I'm like, it's much easier than you're giving yourself credit for. It's just looking at the world around you and reflecting it, and really actually bringing those people forward, because you've been ignoring them this whole time. So it's kind of bringing the two spectrums together, and bringing that to life, to your point, to make that marketing even stronger.
We got a really good question from Kim at Heineken as well, which is around, it's kind of how do you get started when, you know, it feels like so many in media, so many of the big media platforms are, you know, big, often, you know, very mainstream owned, you know, TV stations, the Googles, the Facebooks of the world. Nothing wrong with those platforms, and in fact, you know, sometimes through their networks and you know their creators and things, you can get to diverse talent. But how do we find these diverse media titles? Are people starting to create pools? I know that's kind of Chris's business, but you know, what are the people for second thing?
My biased answer is come to us. My non-biased answer is probably still come to us. No, is how do you find other media titles? You research, Google, you know, you look at it, what comes up, and then you reach into that community. And reach into the community and pay for the reach into the community. Don't just expect the black people in your company to do the work for you. Can you just give us the top 200? Well, yeah, they can do that for you as long as you're going to pay them a bit more, because it wasn't in their job description when they got the job. You know, and I'm being honest there. It's not the job of people from communities that work in your company to sort it out. But there are lots of places and there's lots of businesses that will help you do that. And help you understand, because who understands these publications, these communities, and where they are better than the communities themselves? So I'd reach in and ask them.
And Nadalie, what's the role for agencies? How are you guys playing in that sort of space?
Yeah, so we talked a lot about execution today, and I heard programmatic media come up more than once. You just mentioned there's a lot of consolidations, but there's actually lots of ways to think through this. The supply side, so the SSPs, there's actually minority owned SSPs, work with them. They will give you incredible insight into who the publishers are that they work with. Maybe they haven't been able to onboard someone, and that's okay. That's when you can reach out and have a direct relationship. So utilize the tech around you because it actually is quite insightful. So, tying that back to the research elements of it, obviously there are ad networks that are coming out through the major players, through their diversity initiatives. Also look into that. But again, it's really just looking. I think step one is just research and get information, but there are definitely ways that you can utilize your existing tech to help leverage that and find new publications.
Isabel, do you mind if we come to you for a question? Dale at Mars, loved the story you told about, the ROI journey you went on when things weren't working to really making it work. Is there any more you can share about what some of those insights were and what some of those tweaks were that it took to get it going, or is that a trade secret?
No, definitely not a trade secret. I think like any campaign, in fact, it follows Chris's theme, so let's just keep running with that thread. Like any campaign and how you'd optimize, you want to look at everything from the format to the cost per reach, through to the audiences, through to the products and the messages you're putting in the environment. So there are so many different levers that can be pulled, and just the overall message is that in the same way that you'd optimize any other campaign, please do take that approach with this kind of media too.
Brilliant. So then the last question we have live, just quite a big one, but a good one, is around what's research has been done, what evidence is out there. And I think it asks more broadly around assets and creative. And I'd use this to quickly plug the WFA hub and some of the work of Camellia and others. We have curated some good resources there. There definitely is lots of research showing, it's not magic, just showing that, positive inclusion, more progressive adverts do perform better on various metrics. But does anyone want to jump in with any really strong evidence they've known or they've seen?
I think, sorry, I was just going to say, I think, similarly, there's tons of research out there, whether it be from Kantar, Gina Davis, tons of organizations that have kind of shown some analysis there. I can speak from a Reckitt perspective. When we took a look at a broad swatch of our ads that were produced across globes, across markets from different brands, we took a different spin. I don't know what a DE&I audience per se is, but the way that we think about it is whoever we are showing is making sure that we're showing them in the most positive way. And so it's more about correlating positive portrayals to performance. And we've been able to do that. And when we did the results and we looked at the analysis, we were like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. If you remove a stereotype in your comms, it's another barrier that you're eliminating between your audience and the core message. Because, when you see a stereotype that might harmfully represent your community or people that you are close to, you can only see that in the comms. And so you never take away the brand message. And so we've been able to prove that for ourselves. But like I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of public studies that show a correlation between positive portrayal of the groups in front of the camera to ad effectiveness.
I think Google's got a really big study where they show, and they did it across a lot of metrics as well. So positive portrayal, like Efrain said, they did how likely intent is by different communities when they not only see their community represented in the ad, but see another diverse community. So i.e. the LGBTQ plus community will have in this Google study sort of interacted higher with an ad that wasn't for the LGBT community, but was for the Black community. Because they said, oh, okay, if they see them, they must see us. So therefore, I think it was 3 times more likely to visit brand kind of response they got. But yeah, there's a lot of studies. I mean, from Kinsey right through to Google, Meta have done studies, and then we've done our own studies, and different agencies have done the studies. There's one from WPP as well, so I'm sure M6 etc. was involved in that, especially in the UK. But yeah, I think let's not try and prove why I should stick the ad in front of Chris. Let's stick the ad in front of me and prove why you shouldn't keep it there, rather than prove why you should bother doing it. If that makes sense.
And if anyone sees any good research that isn't on the WFA Diversity Hub, please do send that through to the WFA team so that other advertisers can benefit from that as well. There's a comment in the chat that I want to address. Actually, I'm not sure what the comment was referring to in terms of the comment that was made on the panel, but I think it's an important one to address. So Ian says, it can be very challenging bringing out one advert that targets all markets. Different target markets can be radically different and require different creatives. Certainly from my perspective, and the approach that we take in Diageo is that diversity and inclusion is very much a local thing. It's rooted in local culture. And it's really, really important to understand that culture and think about the content and the media local culture back versus thinking global advert down. I'm not sure if anyone can think what comment we're related to, do jump in, but does anyone else have a viewpoint on this one?
Yeah,
I do. Go on.
Go ahead, Chris. That's okay.
After you. Okay, let's go. Comment.
I think when we're thinking about, just marketing in general, I understand where people are like, but there's nuance, right? So we're not saying that the nuance goes away of understanding the community and making sure that you're thinking about the messaging resonating with someone. What we're saying is that when you're having marketing, there doesn't need to be a separate budget to support one community. It should be that you're thinking about it in totality, and then you have a comm strategy that's still relevant because it incorporates the cultural nuances, it incorporates, maybe there's some language preferences, there's different elements from the localization. So you need to have those pieces into it, which is, again, I think kind of going back to that bigger marketing strategy, which is you wouldn't run something for the totality of the US if it's only resonating with one market, or you wouldn't think about that globally and only plan for one country, right? So it's taking those same fundamental basics, but applying them into this context.
And I think an important thing as well is, if you are now going to add a whole community to the target demographic, the target audience that you're now going to try and stick your ad in front of, you've just added possible new consumers. So with that comes a little bit of legwork, and also might come a little bit more budget. But if you've just found, I'm in New York right now, but a week ago I was sat in London. 47% of London is non-white. Now, if you've just added the media that reaches that 47%, and you've got some creative that represents that 47%, we've just added to your London marketing 50% more possible consumers. So with that comes a bit more spend and a bit more insight and a bit more thought, and some you might need to run 2 campaigns, one for the 50% you used to reach and one for the 50% you've just added. But that's 50% more consumers. You're not taking away from who you were already getting. And I think we sometimes get caught in that of we've got to remember we've just added a whole load new possible consumers off our brand or our client's brand. So there's a bit of legwork to go and reach them and to get them engaged, and that's our job. That's the beauty of it. That's what gets us out of bed, is figuring out, is there a sweet spot that would speak to both halves of London or all of New York, or is there a common interest that I can base my campaign on, or do I really need to speak to the nuance of each community? In either case, it's fun, it's exciting. Let's go and get everybody to do that intent, but they're going to do it for different reasons. So why would we not have different campaigns to compel them to that reason?
So I think we could talk about this for hours, and I'm sure we will at some point when we meet each other face to face. But for now, I would love each of the panelists to give some parting words, perhaps a top tip that you'd like to give to the people on the line. Over to you, Chris. Why not?
I'm just the gobby one. Why does everyone come to me? I would say go and do it. Whatever it is that you feel is the reason, that little thing that's just making you a bit hesitant, a little bit nervous, try and push through that and go and do it. Well, whatever it is, go and give it a go. We're marketeers. We've got such a cool job. We get to, make people feel and do, and we shape society, and even things like propaganda is marketing done for a bad reason. We've got a lot of immense power and responsibility in what we do. So it should be exciting to go and explore new ways of engaging people. So yeah, go and do it. Push through whatever that barrier is.
Thank you. Efrain?
Yeah, I will say, knowledge is power. And so if you are on the client side or the brand side, ask your agency, can you share the blacklist with me and tell me when it was last updated? And look at that blacklist, look at those keywords. And again, ask yourself, does this align with what my brand stands for and how I would like my brand to perceive? And I think Isabel asked a really great question. A provocation is like, who's not here and why not? And just start there. And if you're on the agency side or even the provider side as a brand safety provider, go and provide those keyword lists to your client partners and say, hey, we haven't looked at this in a while, and I know this doesn't kind of meet the current brand approach or brand strategy. Why don't we revisit this? And just initiating that discussion can be quite momentous. So I would say start by understanding where you stand today, and knowledge is power.
I would leave you with think about it and digest it, because I think all of the things that we talked about today is just how do we create new solutions for a really old problem. And kind of building on what both of my fellow panelists have already said, there's so much opportunity to take this forward. So do that, like just taking all of those elements together, the tactical, the thinking, the action, bringing those into a trifecta to bring forward a different perspective and path forward.
I'm hearing learn, really learn by getting to know things like your block list. Try things and don't be afraid to do it. Just try, and overall have a load of fun in doing it. What a great way to end the panel. And if anyone's question hasn't been addressed, please do get in contact, and I'm sure we can make sure that one of the panelists does address it. Just finally to say, please download the guide. It's now live on the WFA website, and there were 4 big themes that we covered today. So ensuring audiences are diverse and inclusive at the planning stage, making deliberate media decisions and building partnerships. The third one was managing brand suitability and safety alongside inclusion. Efrain really brought that to life with his Reckitt example. And then finally, measuring fairly and investing in research, which is something that at Diageo we have done a lot of and would love to share more learnings with you. So please, let's keep learning from each other. This is just the start of this conversation, and many people have contributed to this guide, but we'll also be releasing new case studies and new research as we go. So a big thank you to the WFA Diversity Task Force and to the WFA team in general for giving us this forum today. It's been such a valuable conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to the panelists.